Hello, hello, hello. My name is Robert. I am the recovery guy, and you have entered into The Fix. Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening. I think that all depends upon when you are listening. Of course, my name is Robert, and I am the recovery guy. And every now and then, I have a guest in studio, but I'm very picky about who my guest would be because I'm very particular in terms of who I will put in front of you. And it's only people who I feel have recovered and maintain on a recovery journey. And today in studio, I have one of my most dear friends, and she is, of all things, an Al-Anon, which is even more exciting because every alcoholic, every person of addiction has an Al-Anon on some level or another, whether it's a significant other, whether it's a sister, another sibling, whether it's your mom, whether it's your dad. We major in holding codependents hostage, because if we don't hold them hostage, they will leave. And therefore, the program of Al-Anon even exists because those individuals need wellness also. And today I have in studio my dear friend Susie, and I met Susie a number of years ago, and we have become fantastic friends. Matter of fact, on a couple of occasions, Laura and I have visited Florida, and we have always made time to meet with Susie. Matter of fact, Susie, if you go to recoveryguy.org, you'll see a lot of blogs that are written by Susie W. and her desire to share the Al-Anon message. So I will let Susie introduce herself, and we'll get on with today's conversation. Susie, how are you?
Hi, Robert. I am wonderful. I am honored to be your guest again. It is always a joy to talk all things recovery with you. I think we could talk about just about anything, but recovery is our favorite subject for sure. It's what bound us together. I found you on Instagram 6 years ago, if you can believe that. This month is 6 years ago.
Wow.
And it's just incredible to me how different my life looks. I've just watched you continue to knock off year after year of your continuous sobriety, which is really inspiring. But it also has been a wonderful journey through my recovery, and now my ability to look back and see how much the program of Al-Anon has influenced that, and then also reaching out to actively recovering addicts, like many of continuously sober addicts, that has profoundly impacted my wellness journey as well. Yeah. So thank you and Laura, for being a part of my story.
You know, I think we have to remember, and you get it, and many other Al-Anons do, and a select number of alcoholics and those addicted do. But there's such a meeting, there's such a mingling between our need to feel good about who we are. It's almost like, an addict needs an Al-Anon because we need someone to co-sign and put up with our shenanigans while we continue our selfish and self-centered life with, needing a codependent to tell us that everything is okay, even though the wheels are coming off the wagon.
Yes, we're good at that.
And I think in a very unhealthy way, an Al-Anon needs, and this is very general, correct me if I'm wrong or off-putting, but an Al-Anon needs a project, someone to think that they can fix, because they see something in us that's redeemable, even though everything else about us is a shambles. Is that close?
Yeah, I would say an unrecovered Al-Anon, an untreated Al-Anon. Absolutely.
I love when you say that, an untreated Al-Anon.
Yes, an untreated Al-Anon is absolutely one of those who sees the potential in others. And as you have said before, which I love, you're like, although all the evidence would point otherwise,
yeah.
we would tell you that there's still hope. So Yes, an untreated Al-Anon absolutely it needs that in their life for the same reason that I did before I got better, got well, is this ability to find meaning in fixing everyone else, because that keeps us from looking at our own issues, our own life, our own instability.
And that's really true, because as long as it's about someone else, why would I look at me? Right.
Absolutely.
And oftentimes uh, the the person we're in a relationship with, again, dependent, regardless of what side of the table on, really becomes our higher power.
Yeah. We call denial a warm blanket in Al-Anon. And I think one of my favorite blogs I ever wrote was on denial, and I called it Queen of the Ostriches, because
Yes,
I
yes.
mean, we absolutely specialize in that, putting our head in the sand, even when, as you say, all the wheels are coming off.
Yeah. And we'll never admit that, because when we do admit that, that means that something needs to change, and we're afraid of change because the only way for me to shave is to look in the mirror.
Yeah.
And I'm therefore I'll grow a disguise, because the
Yeah.
last thing I do, matter of fact, I'll often share in my story the day that I went into treatment on February 9th of 1986. I looked in the mirror and I realized that everyone was gone, because there
Yeah.
were there were no longer voices in my head wondering what I was doing. And when I looked in the mirror and the voices were silent, I realized that if something didn't change, I was going to die. Literally die.
Yes.
Not because I
Yes.
already been dead on so many other levels, but I was physically going to die, and that scared me into treatment that morning.
Yeah.
And I think that feeling of being alone, that loneliness when it sets in, and that despair, and really no one understands. See, Al-Anons are a non-medicated version of an alcoholic. When something makes me uncomfortable, I go drink, I go use, I go engage in a negative behavior, and that makes my feel good. But
Yeah.
what does an Al-Anon do?
Well, their drug of choice is this idea that you can control, manipulate, alter an outcome for someone else. Live in that warm blanket of denial of reality. It's using other people and relationships to keep you from looking at yourself. Our making our feel good is busying ourselves with everybody else's business instead of our own.
Now, from an Al-Anon apologist standpoint, and if you were to describe Al-Anon as a recovery program for any future Al-Anons who are listening, and also an alcoholic or an addict that you probably should consider going to Al-Anon like me, how would you describe the program of Al-Anon in a general sense?
I mean, I will tell you that the Al-Anon family groups, I'm going to tell you right out of the book. This is right out of every intro and every meeting. We are a fellowship of relatives and friends of alcoholics who share their experience, strength, and hope in order to solve their common problems. We believe alcoholism is a family illness and that changed attitudes can aid recovery. And my thought on it is just that it's for anyone. If you've ever loved an addict or your life has been affected by addiction, then it's a program for you. It absolutely is. We all live through these situations or circumstances that most people would find unbearable. And
Mhm.
somehow we have found a way, either through denial or whatever, to have walked through them. But in this fellowship, what you find is that we can let go of our hopelessness, our helplessness, that there's another way to live. It's really a program of spiritual transformation.
So, as you were speaking, I'm thinking that's a program of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's
Mhm.
Narcotics Anonymous. That's Gamblers
Yeah.
Anonymous.
Yeah.
Because your
Our drug is
goals.
people.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. I that's wise simplicity. I love that wisdom, and that's really true. Because we all have a drug of choice.
Yeah.
We all need to be sedated, because for whatever reason our pain is is unbearable, and we need to mask our pain. Um,
Yeah.
when when did you discover, and I'm going to get personal here because I want people to really understand your story and maybe find themselves within your story. When did you, as Susie W., discover your need for an Al-Anon, for some type of um, directional diversion for yourself and for your children?
Well, I will say I found out about Al-Anon from my therapist, but as only God would have it, my therapist at the time was 20 years sober. So how cool is
Oh,
that?
okay.
Yeah. So the day that I discovered that my life, as you call it, the wheels were falling off, like every part of my life, my relationship with my husband of 23 years, I found out was, he was stepping outside the bounds of our marriage, that he had been secretly drinking, that there were layers and layers of the addiction. As you know, one addiction isn't enough. This disease is progressive. So given time, it branches out into other things, gambling and pills and pornography and all of those
Mm-hmm.
things. And so when I discovered all of that, February 17, so as I said, we're like at the 6-year
Yeah.
anniversary of all that.
Time flies, doesn't it?
Yeah, I will not forget that date. Yeah. So, and that was a 2017. I immediately started calling every therapist that I could find in my phone under the search on Google. And, I was under the impression ignorantly that these people would have receptionists like I do, and they don't. So, unfortunately, that meant that I was leaving messages, and I spent a lunch break just frantically leaving messages. I was on lunch break from patients, and as absolutely God would have it, the one that called me back first, his name was Scott, and he let me know that he happened to be 20 years sober. But he said, from what I hear from your story, there's a lot of pain there. How soon, can I see you? And so upon my first counseling session with him, he asked me about Al-Anon, and I told him I didn't know about it. And he immediately recommended that I find a meeting. And so I, came home like good little researcher. I've always been a good student. I looked up, Al-Anon, and found the closest meeting that was available. And it was a Wednesday night. I had just seen him on Wednesday, so I saw them Wednesday night. And what I knew about myself and why I needed it, Robert, my life was void of things like mental and emotional sobriety. It was void of peace of mind and serenity. These things don't, enter a life that's cluttered with resentments and self-pity and this developed intolerance based off all the unacceptable behavior that I was accepting. And what I learned in my first meet, I knew within a meeting or two that I had a great need of this fellowship, because I saw people in there, Robert, when they would share some of their circumstances, they were on paper worse than I was experiencing. And, somehow they were smiling and laughing, and, they had this vibrancy that I had lost in this disease. So I knew then that I needed it. It was so obvious, because I wanted that, serenity. That serenity prayer almost seemed unreachable those first few meetings.
It almost, I mean, I love when you and I talk, because what you talk about usually dovetails into the next thing I want to address with you. Oh, and by the way, I think Al-Anon is so important. The other night I was in a meeting and I met a young man on a court card, and he was with his fiance, and she and he had been together for 8 years. And I gave him what I thought was appropriate for him as a person seeking recovery and in and out. And he had another DUI, so now he had to go. Not only did he want to go, probably had to was more important than want to. And I looked at her and I said, look, I don't mean to offend you, but there's something wrong with you. If something was not wrong with you, why would you stay with a guy who put you through hell for 8 years? You should consider going to Al-Anon. And he said, oh yeah, there's a meeting, blah, blah, blah. I looked at him and I said, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to her,
Yeah.
And I said, if you expect this relationship to work, then you simultaneously need to pursue your own wellness, because your wellness can't come from him any more than his wellness can come from you.
Yeah.
So One of the words that you mentioned, and maybe I'll combine both questions. What happened? What transpired in your journey where you knew that you were in the right place and you went from going because it was recommended by someone else to going because it was recommended by your realizing you were in the right room? Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Because at some point it has to, in all of our lives, transition from a suggestion or something we're doing for someone else to something that we take ownership of.
Mm-hmm.
And then it becomes innately a part of something that we know we need to be well. And it's one of those things that the better I get, the more I want it.
Mm-hmm.
The more I want it, the better I get. You know, it's like one of those things that just feeds itself as we work on our wellness. I will tell you, I knew I was in the right place. First of all, when they started sharing some of the slogans, they just really resonated with me. I loved one of the first ones I clung to, and I even taped a Q-tip on my mirror, to which my then husband was like, what is that? Do you need to remember to buy Q-tips? I'm like, no, it's just a reminder. But the Q-tip, which is quit taking it personal, which was really huge for me because I had gotten so engaged with his behaviors and thinking they were all about me, and they were really, that's ridiculous, but it was such a great reminder to quit taking it personally. So I think for about 6 or 8 months I had a Q-tip taped on my mirror. The slogan, easy does it. How important is it? The world, when you live in active addiction, everything is screaming important, 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 but not all of it's urgent. And so that was one of the things that came over time, this ability to discern, in his world, there was always an alarm going off, so to speak, a proverbial alarm. But I got to decide, instead of reacting to every hot button, these are certain things that I don't have to respond to. I can respond, not react, all of that. So I loved those slogans, the be still. One of the people in my homeroom, he loved to say almost every meeting, don't just do something, sit there, which is the opposite of what every single untreated Al-Anon would ever do. I mean, the first thing we want to know, what can we do? What can we fix? Who can we help? Just ridiculous. This idea that we have the inability to just sit still. Believe it or not, the world will go on without us. People's circumstances will happen, and probably for the good if we don't interfere. So, and then something was said that I just loved, and I sent it to you last night, actually. The words were said, if he never gets sober, how long will you live this way? Wow. And that hit me like an absolute dagger in my gut, because I thought, and like you and I've talked about before, whenever something hits me in my pride, I know I have to look at it. And when I heard those words, they just hit me like, how long am I willing to live like this? Wow. And I knew, Robert, we talk about, this disease ends in death, institutions, or recovery. And it's exactly the same for Al-Anons, whether it's suicide, whether it's mental illness, whether it's, becoming so overwhelmed or, whatever. It's the same thing. It's no different. We can get just as sick without a substance. And so that one, if he never gets sober, how long will you live this way? And then one of my favorite things that I heard, and this woman eventually became my sponsor, the 3 G's: get off his back, get out of his way, and get on with your life. And I just, when I heard these things, I thought, this is a program that really has, I was just early enough in it to know there could be another way. There was a path toward it, and those are the steps. And that I was so sick and tired of being sick and tired that I knew I wanted to live another way. Yeah. So I was willing to do whatever it took to follow the path that was laid out before me. My sponsor is 26 years now, AA sober, and 25 years Al-Anon. So, similar to yourself, maybe 10 years behind you in your journey of recovery. But there's a lot of experience, strength, and hope in that. And so I just knew there was a path toward that emotional sobriety, that mental peace, that serenity that we all talk about in the serenity prayer. So those are the things that happen. And then I think the 2 pivotal things that I've shared before, when I think it was like maybe my 3rd or 4th meeting, I confided after the meeting in somebody who's still a dear friend to me. I just had lunch the other day with her, but she said, I mentioned to her, I said, oh, I just can't believe I'm teaching my 14-year-old how to be treated. And she said, oh, honey, you're teaching your 8-year-old how to be treated. Ouch, ouch, ouch. That will get a mama's attention, like you said to that lady, what's wrong with you? And then the other thing that was said to me was, Susie, only you can decide how much unacceptable behavior is acceptable for you. And I mean, Robert, there's nothing about that is an absolute truth. And so even though it was uncomfortable for me to hear, I bless the women that were brave enough and had the balls to say to me those things that they said early on that really caused me to immediately be willing to go straight to that mirror and look in the mirror and say, God, I'm willing to take step one and admit my powerlessness, and then invite these steps in as a way to spiritual awakening and wellness.
Well, and what a relief. I remember as a person of recovery, how afraid I was to be honest, because, I thought if you knew what I knew, you wouldn't like me. And I couldn't bear another person asking me to leave, because by that time my second wife told me to get out. My parents wouldn't have me over. I was unemployable. My siblings had stopped speaking to me, and I had no friends. And here I was in this room of Alcoholics Anonymous, knowing that I had to be honest, but I could only be honest to what I was comfortable with. Anything more than that would expose how sick I really was. And again, you might, I know they say keep coming back, but you say keep coming back, but you don't know how twisted I am. Did you have that fear going in when you realized?
Yeah.
I'll say one thing. One of the things that Selena said in the speaker meeting I went to last Saturday, she said in her moment of clarity and belonging, she talked about wanting to stab her husband in the eye while he slept. And as she said this, a number of the women in the room started laughing. And she realized that she was more normal than she thought she was, Not that we would ever recommend stabbing your significant other in the eye while they sleep, but there's that anger, there's the
resentments. Absolutely.
That resentment, which you already talked about. So I want to touch on that, but it's interesting that moment of belonging, when you read your preamble, there's a fellowship context to it.
Yeah, there definitely is. And I will tell you, Robert, one of my greatest tools, because I had a commute several days a week that was quite lengthy enough to get through a YouTube speaker meeting. And I just started rifling through the top 100, Al-Anon speaker meetings on YouTube. And I would listen to these things, and, there was a little bit of my story in all of them, not exactly my story in any of them. But when I would hear things like, they were choking each other in bathtubs and, trying to drown each other and almost, attempted murders, I thought, well, gosh, because I did have a tremendous amount of shame surrounding my resentment toward him, because it had just gotten to the point where you just get like, do I have to do everything? And why did you choose that again? It just, at the end, by the time you get to the point where you're, saying, I need help, there were so many resentments in my heart. And as a woman who professes Christ with her mouth, it was not hard for me to believe in a higher power. I have a tremendous amount of faith. And I knew I was betraying even my faith and my profession of faith by the way that I had allowed this bitter root to take hold in my heart. It was a full-on tree in my heart. It wasn't a bitter root. It had exploded into just this wildfire of resentment in my heart. And I knew that wasn't who I was. And further to the point, my children, I've told you this before, that like most of the time, if you ask kids of an untreated Al-Anon and an untreated addict, most of the time they'd probably rather be with the addict before treatment, because they're usually more fun, less controlling, all that. And my kids, it was a birthday dinner before this February 17 date. And I can't remember that we were all going around ordering, and I apparently didn't think my children had ordered everything precisely enough for their taste. And so I like called before the server left, I was like, well, she needs ranch, which I knew they would have asked for, but you know what? They could ask for it. I mean, and when he walked away from the table, I will never forget, my oldest child said, Mom, you're so controlling. And I could feel my heart just go, like I'm the crazy one, that was that thing. And then their father laughed at the table over it. And I thought, oh my word, I've got to take a look at this. And that was my first awareness. And it was before I knew about Al-Anon, but it was my first awareness that something was wrong inside of me and that I had allowed myself to get lost in this, because people that knew me growing up called me a free spirit. How did I go from that to controlling? It's like this complete, just like if you talk to yourself when you were a kid, you probably never dreamed you'd be where you were that day in 1986 and in your first, meeting.
Yeah. How did I get here?
Yeah. How did I get here? And so it's the same for us. I did not grow up controlling and freaking out and, all of that stuff, or trying to, like I remember my sponsor saying, how many different ways did you say it, Susie, to try to get him to understand? And I just laugh because it's true. We keep thinking if we say it another way, or maybe if I change it, it's like, no, they will do and be exactly who they are. And it's up to me to decide how much I let that affect my life.
Yeah. And as you're sharing, again, there's so many universal truths that are common between a person in AA or NA and an Al-Anon. And as you were sharing, I'm thinking lack of power. That was my dilemma, and I would imagine even more so it's true with an Al-Anon, because again, I can sedate myself, right? I can lessen the impact of anything based on the right amount of alcohol or drugs or distracting behavior that would also, add to, my addiction and just made me sicker than others in many ways. But, as I'm hearing you share about ordering your food for your kids, did you find yourself, the more you realized you didn't have any control over your significant other, the more control you tried to exhibit in the life of your children and in your profession and your staff and things?
100%, Robert. You know how you can spot an untreated Al-Anon? They're the same people that have like a planner with 72 highlighters. They plan the planners. They have a planner for this. They have a food they've got a meal plan for the week. They have their, I'm saying this like it's not me. My spice rack is alphabetized. Like there is, I'm not even kidding you. It's like, that's exactly what happens when there is this thing in your life that you can't control. You try to exert control in every other area, to the point where we would damage relationships as much as the addict. I mean, truly, we probably all know people in our lives like I was, where you start alienating people because you start telling everyone else what to do. And, I told you one of my biggest takeaways early on in Al-Anon is the word should is like cursing in church. Unless I am using it toward myself, it simply is inappropriate for me to tell anybody else what they should do. It's one thing when you're talking about a minor child where you're trying to keep them out of the road when they're playing or something outside. I mean, obviously there's appropriate levels of that. But at this point in my children's life and my life, and my ex-husband's life, my addict's life, there was just there was no need for me to be shooting all over them the way I was.
And I want to get back to something you had said, and once again, you transitioned to it perfectly, where it's almost like turning the mirror on ourselves. One of the things you had said previously was the amount of resentment you had. At what point did you realize that the only solvable resentment you had was when you dealt with your self-resentment and started working on you instead of working on your addict?
Oh, that is such a good question, Robert. The beautiful thing about Al-Anon is it's like this spiritual renovation project within ourselves.
I love that. Spiritual renovation.
Yeah, it's like a spiritual renovation. Like I liken it to like literally like a reno project. I mean, you've probably done a home improvement project. It's like first we have to like look at ourselves, and that awareness did come to me. I mean, I immediately, I'd say it wasn't even a month or two in, I was so willing to accept those steps 1, 2, and 3. The powerlessness, I was so aware of my powerlessness that it was almost a relief to fall into steps 1, 2, and 3 and allow, I can't, he can, I'll let him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I became very aware that the only thing I could change was myself, the only thing. And so first, it's like we remove all the old habits, the patterns, the mindsets that we once clung to. I mean, what good were they doing? They got me where I was. That was clearly not well. So first, it's like the gut job is removing all of that. That's the demo part of the renovation. We take out all the undermining framework that was within ourselves. And I feel like that's where the real transformation first begins. It's when we allow our higher power to help us really literally do a gut job, Robert. You have to be willing to look at yourself honestly, with radical acceptance of where my life was at the time, the choices that I was making, the patterns that I had developed, the habits that I had developed, all of that, and letting my higher power literally take me down to the studs. And some of those, frankly, were probably termite infested, let's be honest. I mean, I stayed 23 years, Robert. So if you thought something was wrong with the woman that had been there 8 years, I can't imagine what you thought of me. And that's like, this was like the beginning of the transformation. So the first part, the demo, is just being radically honest with ourselves. And then we begin to replace and revitalize. And this is where we input all the new ways of thinking. And that's through the steps. And obviously with the help of a sponsor, I'm a big believer in that. I think you can do the steps by yourself, but it's not the same. They lose their impact. It's a watered down version when you don't bring someone into it, and you can't really do steps 4 and 5 without them.
And I agree, because I think trying to do this by yourself goes against every principle, because you have to get rid of tradition 1, where it says our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity. There's a sense of unity, and if I'm by myself, there's no unity. There's no unity in one. And trying to do the steps by myself would mean, to me, as I understand the program of recovery, would be a half measure. And it says half measures avail us
nothing. Agreed. Yeah. And then it's like, once we incorporate those new habits and like kind of attitudes, it's new attitudes of our heart too. That's when I began to act and respond differently to everything that was said. The same things were happening, and I acted and responded differently. It's like, it's like a spiritual renovation. It becomes like the ultimate before and after, the ultimate glow up, really. And it takes, I mean, honestly, Robert, there's no renovation that isn't time consuming and painful sometimes. So this spiritual transformation is both time consuming and often painful. But it's necessary, and it is beyond rewarding. I mean, it is infinitely and ultimately rewarding work.
No, and as you were sharing, I was thinking about some projects that I've done in the backyard, and whether it was a concrete slab I was laying or hollowing out some ground. And so in Utah, and I would imagine other places, you have to call before you dig. Before you dig, you got to realize what is under there. What am I going to uncover? And then you decide whether or not how deep you can dig, how deep you should dig. Does the soil need to be treated? Because the last thing you want to do is build a good building on top of a foundation that has something wrong with it, because the building is going to be affected. And when we put in the footings, I don't know a lot about building, but I know enough to know that there's a connection to my recovery. One of the things that I'm so excited about you, and why you and I are such great friends, is I know your life has been transformed by your faith. We are transformed by the renewing of our faith. But also I know that the program of Al-Anon has transformed you in your life. In what areas do you think are most significant, great milestones where you've used the 12 steps of recovery to have that life transformation?
Well, first of all, I just want to echo what you said. It is absolutely transformative. And across the board, Robert, the steps and traditions have absolutely radically transformed all of my relationships with my family, with my friends, work relationships, work environment things. The steps and traditions together have just transformed those. I feel like the traditions can apply more to, relationships with others. But honestly, the relationship that the recovery program has transformed the most is the relationship I have with myself.
Mm-hmm.
That's been the most powerful transformation. I'm not afraid to look in the mirror anymore, and I don't just mean the mirror; I mean figuratively. I'm not afraid to go under the foundation and say, if I need to work on this again. Every once in a while, things come up in our lives, or a new challenge presents itself, and it allows me to walk back through that personal inventory. And where the first time I did it, it's kind of like when you have somebody come over, like watch one of those shows for renovations, and they tell them on the surface, like, this is what I think we're going to have to do. And how many times once they pull stuff off and pull
Yeah.
the facade off, is there way more underneath to deal with than you ever saw at
I've
first.
watched Property Brothers more than once. I know
Yes,
exactly what you're
yes,
talking about.
exactly. So there's always this unbudgeted, care that needs to be attended to. And I will say in my life, every time that I've had to go back in and look at that framework and that foundation, I found that there was something that I was either unwilling or unaware that I needed to look at before. And so that's why this is a lifetime process,
Mm-hmm.
I believe. One time you asked me to share why I kept going because I wasn't living with an addict anymore. But this is why, because these things will always resurface, whether it's something in the work environment, something between my children as they grow and transition, the stakes get higher as they get older. We go from talking about, what high school to what college to now a marriage partner potentially, or, just all of those things. And now with their father being terminally ill, that has presented a whole nother layer of depth of wound for
Mm-hmm.
them. And for me, that requires us to go back through this personal inventory and see how the steps apply. So the relationship I have with myself is one where I don't fear what that is. I'm not afraid to need help. I'm not afraid of my dependence on my higher power. I don't feel like I need to say, I got this, God, I got this, because I know I don't. I know what
Mm-hmm.
that path led me to. And so I am completely okay with living surrendered to a higher power to help me with these things. And I think that's where a lot of us, we get this, grit it out, muscle it out, grind it out, hustle it out. Okay, but that availed us what? That's a half
Nothing.
measure.
Yeah.
Not surrendering to our higher power is the biggest half measure we'll ever undo ourselves with. So I would say it's transformed my relationship with myself, but also looking more. It allowed me to look at myself. You incorporate a lot of other teachers into your recovery, and Tony Robbins, not Tony Evans, Tony Robbins gives this analogy of our lives being like a wheel, and the
Mm-hmm.
spokes on the wheel are what support it. And if any of those spokes is broken, you have a flat spot on the wheel. And so it doesn't roll properly. Yes, you can still make forward motion, but you hit
Yeah.
this thud every so often. And so I think the other way it's transformed, it's allowed me to have this alignment physically, spiritually, emotionally, and mentally that are working in alignment with each other. And there was a quote. Oh, I have to find it. It said something like, one person in alignment can transform more in the world than 1,000 people not in alignment. And I thought that was
Yeah.
really powerful.
No, and I love that. And a couple things come to mind as you share. And once again, there's such a cohesiveness between what you're saying and what I've come to believe in my journey of recovery. And that's exactly what it is. It is a journey, and I was talking to my friend New York Dave the other day, and Dave's got going on 29 years, so he's been around a minute.
Yes.
And we were talking about the only place in the 12 steps of recovery where alcohol is mentioned is in the first half of step one. We were powerless over alcohol and our life had become unmanageable. Other than that, it's about living. And that's why 12-step program is, we believe this program will have its benefit for all, and I'm reminded that I never want to wake up, unless I'm in heaven, I never want to wake up thinking I'm done,
So
because
good.
I always know that I can be a better version of me, starting with how good of a husband and how sensitive can I be to Laura?
Mm,
How good of a caring father and loving father can I be? The most important roles. How much of a child of God can I be? How good of a husband can I be? Uh, how good of a father? How good of a grandfather? How good of a sibling? How good of a friend? How good on down the line. But everything starts with God as we
yes.
understood God. That's why right after that initial surrender in step one comes the introduction to a power greater than ourselves that could restore us, right?
Yeah.
To whatever condition, in this case, sanity. And so there's a great role, and you, because you're responsible for these younger humans that you help bring into their life, they need to know that mom is doing good.
Yeah.
And you need to know that you are setting an example to them that they might avoid some of the challenges that you have. Obviously, you can't be responsible for how they do or what they don't do, but you can be responsible for the image that you portray. How is that shaped? And
Wow.
how do you view your responsibility as an Al-Anon, but most importantly, as a mom?
Yeah, I think this is the area where I am the most grateful for finding the program when I still had lots of years with my children under roof.
Yeah.
I mean, we're up to, 6 years now, and they're still going to be here a bit longer, especially Meredith. And I realized I didn't even realize how significant it was for me until I had spent time in the program and realized how many families this is a generational thing for.
Mm-hmm.
And then how many of the women in my home group actually said to me, I so wish that I had found these rooms when my kids were your kids' age, or
Yeah.
my greatest regret is that I did not find these rooms when I still had my children at home, or I'm so jealous that, that message was given to me over and over the years from women in and out of my home group. And all I can say, Robert, is it has allowed my children to live A, with peace under the roof, B, with an absolute awareness that I am okay, that we are going to be okay, and that because of our higher power, that whatever circumstances come, there will be a path through them. And so they don't ever wonder what's happening. We're not walking on eggshells anymore. I mean, all these things that happen when you live in active addiction, everyone around you, I remember saying to the addict once, we cannot forget the conversations that you don't remember. We don't have the luxury of forgetting the ones because,
Wow. That's
often
deep.
in a blackout, you would say these things or do these things, or, just a lot of stuff happened, and things were said that were so hurtful and harmful. But we just don't, the Al-Anons, the sober, we don't have the luxury of forgetting a conversation that you'll never remember.
See, let me interrupt you, because that is something that every addict needs to understand. I think that is so critical, because I want to just say, I'm sorry, I'm living a new way, and I expect you to just go along for the ride. And yet you're still wounded, you're still affected. And boy, that I want you to talk about that a little bit more in the rest of the time we have, because I think of everything that we've just discussed about from a relationship standpoint. If our listeners are in a relationship with an Al-Anon, or an Al-Anon is still in a relationship with an addict, this is something that we both need to hear, but especially the addict. So talk about that again.
Yeah. So, for example, like you were saying, Robert, like I will give you a current example. Right now, he's not understanding why his oldest child is not willing to be in communication right now, and
Mm-hmm.
it is the this is a girl who has dug deep into trauma therapy. I mean, she's a student of the word. She is surrendered to her higher power, and in her mind, the healthiest choice she can make right now is to not have any contact. And because he does not remember the circumstances under which he left the last time, he is mystified as to why she would not want to be in contact with him. And I reminded him again, I said, I am sorry that you do not remember the events that she is unable to forget.
Wow.
He was in a blackout on his way to the airport. There was just a whole lot of just absolutely unacceptable circumstances that they walked through. And it included me having to leave work and race to the airport. It was a horrific day, one of the worst. And he simply doesn't remember it. And it's not something that I would hold against him. I don't have a resentment toward him that he doesn't remember. It's the nature of the illness under active addiction. But to think that you could just be sober now and believe that that would have no impact on the people that love you the most is just absolute. That's denial. That's king of the ostrich. That is an equally toxic use of denial. And in some cases, it may not even be denial. If you are living, where you are blacking out and using to the point of, near unconsciousness, then don't waltz back into our lives sober and expect that all of those things that you don't remember didn't happen. It would be fair to say, what is it that I need? If you're really honestly wanting to make amends, ask them, what have I done? What do I not remember? How can I understand the level of amends that I might need to make?
Yeah.
And I know that's one of those things where you have to know where to make amends would be harmful to myself. If you're not ready to hear that and you don't have enough recovery under your belt to understand that this is a them thing and not a you thing. If you don't have the bandwidth to listen to them and hold that without letting it fill you with shame and going back to using, then don't ask. You're not ready yet. But when you get to the point that you are, which I don't think would maybe even be in the first few years of sobriety, like that guy that was newly sober that you were just talking about earlier today. But, you're going to have a hell amount of recovery under your belt and self-awareness to be able to ask those questions honestly and be able to accept the answers.
Mm-hmm. No, and I find that to be very true in my life and relationships with important people in my life. And Laura, and some of her story. But there are things that Laura, for those of you who don't know, Laura's my wife. We've been together over 34 years. I met her in 2.5 years.
She's a beauty. I love her.
2.5 years of recovery, and I still thank God every day. But there are things about Laura's dad, who was very mean and probably bipolar and an addict himself. There are things that he said and did to her that she just will never have a successful relationship because he has never acknowledged doing those things. And she's a 54-year-old person. And these are things that happened to her 40 years ago. And yet she still, in some ways, is wounded. She doesn't allow it to affect her, but she's wounded nevertheless. And I think it's really important for us addicts to remember how badly we did wound you along the way, and how we have to walk in.
Well, and I don't think the point of understanding, it's not to give more shame. Like, that is the most toxic emotion, in all of recovery for both of us. The shame just has no place in our recovery. But if you need to know just so that you can understand why there may be healing work that needs to take place. I mean, that's where, to me, the work is the most powerful. If you would have told me that I could sit here with you and not have anger in my heart or resentment in my heart, even with these most recent circumstances with my children, I know exactly why they're hurting. But I also have a tremendous amount of compassion for the addict, and knowing that there is so much unwellness there that I don't hate him. I don't wish him ill. I wish with all of my heart that he could experience the freedom of serenity. That would be my greatest hope, but it does not allow me to get dragged into the space emotionally that lets me start making bad decisions, for myself and my serenity, because that would do nothing for my children or our home.
I have someone very close to me who a number of years ago in a conversation, I was talking about in increasing our relationship and our degree of communication. And this person said to me, we may never be closer than we are right now. If that's okay with you, we can have a relationship. If it's not okay with you, there's nothing I can do. I was crushed because this person's very important to me, and I was crushed. And yet I knew what the boundaries were. I knew, what my expectation, and it took a lot of soul searching. And in some ways, as painful it was, I was relieved because I realized I don't have to own that,
No.
and I think that kind of transparency and honesty is so important on both sides of the table. It was important for them to say it.
Yes.
Because they were standing up for themselves the best way they knew how. And this is a very healthy person. And it was good for me to hear, because I realized that there's some damage that just not going to be undone. And that's just the way it is. And it's not because she doesn't like me or anything like that. It's just that, there was too many things that were broken along the way, and they're, Humpty Dumpty is not going to be completely put back together again. And that has to be okay with me, because if it's not, I'll eventually gain a resentment, and I'll use it as a blockage to the serenity that I know recovery can bring me.
Yeah, I think it's important to realize what you just said, Robert, because it means for both people, both healthy people, the Al-Anon side and the addict side, that we are able to heal and offer forgiveness to ourselves and or to others, or both. And we do not have to maintain relationship in order to be clean emotionally.
Yeah.
In other words, to live clean emotionally means that you don't leave things unsaid that need to be said, or apologies. So in her case, it was letting you know her boundary. And in your case, it was accepting it. But you can live relationally clean without keeping people in your life. It's not always healthy for one side or the other to maintain relationship, but that's not a sign of the health of the individual. So it's more important that I live relationally clean with everyone in my life. And what I've learned in my recovery journey is that means my relationships began to look different with some people, and that was okay. I had to be okay with that. As a recovering people pleaser, I had to accept that for me to be healthy and live in congruency with what I knew was right, it meant there might be people that I did not maintain the same level of relationship. And it's not because they're bad and I'm good, or I'm bad and they're good. It's none of that. It's what's necessary. The one thing I'll say, I know one of the things we were talking about was, why it's important that both sides, pursue recovery. And what I can tell you is, if the addict pursues recovery and I don't, it's very likely that inadvertently I will undermine their recovery.
Yeah.
Not intentionally, but I will undermine their recovery, which means things can look different. It will make something uncomfortable for the person in recovery. And so either it will alter our relationship permanently, or they will use again. And neither one of those are a great option. Whereas if I were to seek recovery and the addict didn't, which is more my story, it then means, like that whole conversation we've had about hostages and hostage taking, which I love, and it relates to that. If I get better and they don't, all of a sudden, this means there's going to be a change in the relationship.
Yeah.
And it requires me to look at it. And am I brave enough, if I get better and they don't, to say, what then am I willing to accept in this relationship? It may mean that there's, a radical awareness that I can't stay in this relationship. Or it may make the addict so uncomfortable, my well living, that they're like, I've got to get better. I want a part of this, So it's ideal if both people are seeking. I mean, the perfect world is that the addict and the Al-Anon both partners in those relationships go get help, because the one will automatically reinforce the other. If you're getting better and I'm getting better, I'm not going to undermine your recovery, and you're not going to force me to look at whether or not not we can maintain a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, there needs to be balance. And when we talked about alignment, there needs to be that alignment. I know a person who was early in recovery, they're within their first 50 days. And in the beginning, their significant other would rather have them drink because they were the one was standing still and the other was trying to work through the challenges of not drinking, which there are a lot in the beginning. And the other person, just didn't know what to do and now they're going to Al-Anon and they're pursuing their own path and giving that person the room to recover while they work on who they are as well.
It's interesting. When we get better, there are people in our lives who need us sick to be in relationship with us.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that's a whole nother conversation because for me to get well, I can't piggyback off of your wellness. I need to look in my own mirror, see my own defects of character, my own lack of a power greater than me that I'm not relying on, and say, I can't, he can, and I think I'll let him, which are the first 3 steps of recovery. Hey, in 2 minutes, what would you say to the alcoholic and the Al-Anon about what Al-Anon as a program of recovery has to offer?
Well, I would just say, first thing to recognize is that you're not alone. I mean, this is such a widespread disease. So do not let your fear or shame of admitting that there's a problem, you are not alone. And that I believe that both helplessness and hopelessness are the perfect starting point to get help in Al-Anon. I mean, that's the perfect entry point to Al-Anon. Come in hopeless, come in helpless, and I promise you, there is something beyond that. It's just, that flat on your back for Al-Anons, that's our rock bottom. That fully helpless, hopeless feeling is just the perfect starting point for step 1. It really is. And I feel like letting people know that there is a possibility of serenity, this mental and emotional sobriety and wellness are possible. And I know that this program offers a way to it. I'm sure there are other ways. This is the way I know it's worked for me. So it's the one I can share. But if you feel helpless and hopeless and you're like, you just can't possibly understand my story, start listening. It requires zero commitment on your part to tune into YouTube and pull up Al-Anon speakers and just listen to the most listened to ones. There's a reason they're the most listened to. There is a lot of information there that will allow you to see similarities to your story. And Al-Anon, WSO.org, type it in. All they ask for is your zip code. It'll pull up meetings nearby. It'll let you know if they're open meetings. It'll let you know if they're for newcomers. It'll let you know all that. And you can buy the literature now on Amazon. You don't have to just get it, directly through the World Service Organization. So those are some great starting points, to find it. And you can certainly, reach out to me on Instagram. It's at Suzy DMD, SUZY DMD, and just shoot me a message request and just say, I'm a friend of Robert's, or I listened to the podcast, and I will immediately accept your friend request. And I can, be as much encouragement as I can from a distance and helping you find resources and accounts that will also promote your wellness journey.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And as usual, you and I could have another cup of tea and talk forever because we're in such great alignment. I find our friendship to be in such agreement.
Yes.
Because the program of Al-Anon saves lives, just like the program of Alcoholics Anonymous saves lives.
Yes.
In a literal sense, not just in a spiritual, emotional, or mental, but it often saves the physical life of a person because the despair that is wrapped around codependency of an Al-Anon and the addiction of an addict causes far too many people to think that their life doesn't have value and they decide not to live. And we all have stories about people, getting to the end of their rope and alone in despair. And both you and I and those who are active recovery members of programs know what that's like, and we don't want anyone, as Bill Wilson, the co-founder of AA, would call it needless suffering.
Yes.
So anyone out there who is suffering, you're suffering needlessly. because there's an Al-Anon and there's an AA and other 12-step programs that can help you recover from that seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So, Susie, thank you as usual for being a part of our recovery journey. And I hope if you are qualify for Al-Anon, you go. If you qualify for AA, you go. If you qualify for both, you just seek recovery the best way that you possibly can. And don't forget to go to recoveryguy.org, your favorite podcast channel for Recovery Guy Podcast. And of course, my shameful self-promoting, you can go to YouTube for Real Recovery Guy. And if there's anything I can do for you on Instagram, let me know at recovery_guy, and I will assist you the best way that I know how, which is the 12 steps of recovery and a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscious. So thank you very much for being a part of today's podcast, and we wish you well. Have a great day, Susie.
Thank you, Robert. Bye. Love to you and Laura.